Hey everybody, thank you for listening to Radio Taiwan International. I'm your host, Michelle Chang, and you're listening to Geek Out. Basically, what's your cup of tea? What tickles your fancy or what floats your boat? Join us as we share passions from people in Taiwan and around the world. So today in the studio, we are joined by our international news team's Chris Gorin.
Hello.
Hey, and my friend from New York, David Pirozzi.
Yo.
Okay. So, well, it's really Chris Gorin's show today. David showed up early and he's in the studio. It's great.
I'm glad to have some extra company.
Right?
I'm already causing problems.
Fun. Okay, so Chris, you're first of all, musicians. The RTI office is actually filled with musicians, which is really cool. And kind of unsurprising because, you know, radio, right? What kind of personality gravitates towards this industry?
Yeah.
But right, what do you play, first of all?
Well, I play guitar, and I also sing in a band, Yomada Tamada, if anyone's based in Taipei. Come check us out.
Where do you guys usually play so we can come check you out?
Pretty much for our live shows, we've always played at Revolver.
Oh, fun.
With side note about the local music industry in Taiwan is that most venues are pay to play, and Revolver is not. So that's why we usually play there.
Wait. Pay to play. So the band has to pay in order to play there?
Yeah, this is actually the case of some venues in America too. Like I know, for example, the famous Hollywood venue, Whiskey A Go Go, is kind of like this, which is that you essentially have like a set fee that you have to meet. And you're expected to make that through ticket sales. And if you don't sell enough tickets to meet that, you pay the difference. Right. But if you exceed that, then you keep the difference.
So Revolver does not require that.
Revolver has no minimum.
Oh, perfect.
In fact, you actually get a cut of the night's ticket sales.
Yeah.
That's good.
That's really good.
So it's kind of nice. Yeah, usually make a little money.
Right. Independent bands, fabulous. What is it called again?
Revolver. The band is called Yomada Tamada. There's not much out there yet, but we do have a demo coming out soon. So
go listen. Stay tuned. Excellent. Okay, so what do you play?
So I'm the lead singer and guitar player in that band. It's a three-piece, but I actually started as a drummer. I started playing when I was like 12, and then I started playing guitar when I was maybe 18.
Okay.
Yeah, but I've since really fallen, in terms of the nerdy stuff, I'm way more into the guitar gear than I ever was with drums.
Okay, so I'm a layman. I don't play either of those, but I have obviously seen and listened to them. So explain the gear that's related, you're talking about.
Well, so obviously the first thing is the guitar itself. And when you really get into the equipment, there's like so many myths about what makes a guitar sound the way it does. What we often call tone. Tone is this like magic word among guitar people, down to the type of wood that's used in the body versus the neck.
Oh yeah.
The kinds of pickups, which is probably the main factor in determining a sound. The pickup, for those who don't know, is essentially it's like a little microphone for the guitar that picks up the sound of an electric guitar. And then there's all kinds of things like the little capacitors that you use in the controls. A lot of it, in my opinion, is mumbo jumbo. But like I think Keith Richards once had this phrase, which is a guitar is just some wire and a bit of wood, which is kind of true. I mean, this is really old technology from like the 1950s. And there's a kind of aspect of guitar playing which is always seeking to find those like vintage tones from that time. Like specifically between the 50s and the 70s. Much respect
for the old tones.
Yeah. So like, for example, vacuum tubes. This was a technology that used to, like what transistors do now, vacuum tubes used to do. So like old TVs and stuff, old radios, if you've ever seen one, and you look in the back,
there's these
huge glass tubes that are in there. And that was like a way that signals were amplified for like a really long time. And guitar amps are one of the only pieces of equipment that still to this day primarily use tubes.
Really?
In fact,
I like that.
It's true. And like there are only a few factories in the world who are left even making tubes because the demand is so low.
Right.
And and then there's this whole other thing where like people say vintage tubes sound better than old ones, so you can spend a lot of money on like vintage tubes from the old factories. And but it all kind of comes down to the fact that people are seeking to make their guitar tones sound kind of the way it did back then, because that is when electric guitar like got really big.
Right.
It was like rock and roll in the 50s and then through the 70s, Jimi Hendrix, etc. So unfortunately, these days, like guitar equipment is actually a bigger industry than it's ever been because more people are playing guitar.
Especially with the pandemic, the very recent pandemic where everybody was shut in the house and a lot of people picked up a new hobby, right? So
true. And but there's a weird way in which like things that people want are kind of backward looking. They're like always sort of searching to sound like
Retro.
Jimi Hendrix or Dave Gilmour or whoever from those are the kind of the things people are usually searching for.
Right. David, do you play anything, by the way?
My skills have probably atrophied at this point, but I have played all the saxophones, the clarinet, the trumpet, and the piano.
Oh, wow. I did not know this,
Yes.
even though I've known you for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, well, all of that predates our knowing each other.
Okay.
But yeah, I was in band throughout school and all that.
Okay. So of those instruments, were any of I'm going to say none of them are electronic.
No, none of them are electronic.
Right.
The piano, I
any
guess, could be
instrument
made
can
elec-
become electronic.
Yeah, the piano would be the closest to it, but it's just a standard saxophone or whatever. Just question for you, Chris. Do you think that people are seeking out the old tubes because they have a reverence for the music that was made then? Because that coincides with when rock music was both at its peak and all new ground was still being broken, and right now it's completely mature. So
yeah, I think so. I mean, because everyone, when you become an electric guitar player, there's like, first you learn the physical skill of playing a guitar. But if you're playing electric guitar, the way guitar sounds can actually be like vastly different depending on the equipment that you're looking for. And usually whatever the people's formative music was that they listened to, that's kind of the guitar tone that they're going for for the rest of their life. I mean, it's just kind of the way things are.
Nope, that makes sense.
And yeah, it's basically exactly what you said. It's kind of like if people were really into classic rock when they started playing guitar, if those are the songs that they learned, that's kind of the sound they hear in their head every time they play guitar, and they're kind of always looking to do that.
Right.
So the same goes now for like the really modern metal sounds, which is one of the, I would say, like the most popular modern sounds for guitar. If people grew up listening to, I don't know, Meshuggah or Animals as Leaders, or these kind of, they're playing 8-string guitars with these really
bands.
deep tones. Oh, you know them? Okay,
No,
great.
I've seen Meshuggah, and I have all the Animals as Leaders albums.
Okay, yeah, I'm a huge fan of those bands as well. But it's like, if that was the way that you were like, man, that sounds so cool, and that's why you started learning guitar, then you're probably going to lean like way in that more modern direction,
Right.
rather than looking for these vintage tones.
Right. Or like all of my friends who are in a band who are my age, they all just want to sound like Radiohead.
Yeah, although it's funny, I'm also a massive Radiohead fan, but they don't really have like a distinct guitar tone, in my opinion. So I don't actually see many people like gearheads like searching for the Radiohead tone.
Right. The
Plus they have
band
3
strives for it, though. Yeah.
That's true, but
Yeah.
they also have 3 guitar players, and they use like a lot of non-electric guitar instruments, so that might have something to do with it. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So basically, when you play guitar, so walk us through the process. For those listeners who don't actually play a guitar, what specific gadgets are being used? Obviously, the guitar itself.
Yeah, so the first is the guitar, and then, of course, the amplifier is probably the next most important thing, and then in between the guitar and the amplifier are the effects pedals,
Right.
and that's kind of like this whole other rabbit hole of stuff, because this is also an industry that's getting bigger and bigger all the time,
Right.
and even the kind of industry around it is getting bigger. So like there's a pedal company called JHS. They also now have like one of the biggest YouTube channels for music,
Oh wow.
because they don't, like, their videos don't just cover their own stuff. Like the guy who started the company is also a huge like pedal historian, basically. He has like a little mini museum in like their company.
I love how
And,
people can get super into something that seems really, niche to the public, right?
Yeah.
So there's a guitar pedal museum.
It's not, I don't even know if the public can go there, but it's like when you just look at the background of his place, it's just like all these pedals arranged. Whenever they talk about a history of a certain pedal or a certain company, he like collects them all. He has like the original promotional materials that came with it, like the original manuals, and like the box. Like it's really important that he has the original box, and he's got like even these little jingles to go if he doesn't have the box.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and if he does, he's like, he has the box. It's like a little song, and but this is like a huge channel. It gets like millions of views, or at least hundreds of thousands usually, and so. But anyway, so yeah, the pedals are,
For the layman, what do they do?
well, they can do almost anything. I mean, they can,
Magic.
yeah, they can give you like a distorted sound. They do reverb and echo. They do basically anything that you hear on a guitar that isn't just like
Playing
coming from
it
the
itself,
amplifier,
right.
that's all coming from pedals.
Wow.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that. It's like, it's not things that you push on the body of the guitar or pluck or push or, you know, squiggle around on the body of the guitar itself. It's really coming from the effects pedals.
Oh yeah, and like there's even like, have you ever heard of shoegaze music?
Of course.
You have. I know. I can see that you're
My
a little bit
bloody
more
Valentine.
in my realm of the
Yeah,
world.
David is definitely in your realm.
Yeah.
Mm.
But it's like it gets this name called shoegaze because like it was a music that was built around guitar effects, and the players were always looking down at their feet because that's where the pedals are on the ground.
Makes sense.
You touch it with your
Shoegaze.
feet. Yeah.
They were gazing at their shoes.
Yeah, and so so this is all operated generally by foot, but there are some really out there things that you can also like use your hand or things on the guitar to manipulate. But generally speaking, it's like it's a little pedal that you step on, and that just turns the effect on or off. There's also things like the wah pedal, which goes wah wah, and like that's operated by like pushing a lever with your foot and things like that. But generally, it's just an on off kind of thing.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you play, one more time for the fans. What's your band name again?
Yomada Tamada.
That's right. When you're playing at Revolver, Yomada Tamada. So the music, specifically your music that you're playing, how much are we into the guitar effects pedals?
I mean, I personally, because I'm into pedals and I just like to own them, like I do try to do things, but frankly, like I keep my setup fairly simple. I also have what is called a modeler. It's from a company called Line 6. Shout out to Line 6, where I can actually replicate the sound of effects and amplifiers digitally. So it's kind of like a digital version of these things. And they try to replicate all the equipment, like piece by piece, transistor by transistor, valve by valve, to make it sound that way. So this is really cool also when playing at home, because I don't actually have a true amplifier in Taiwan.
Well, okay, generally you don't want a true amp. Okay.
Well, you would if you could.
You would if you could. If you did have an actual like maybe soundproofed room in your apartment.
Exactly.
Right.
In a city, it's really hard to have that kind of thing.
Listeners, guys, in Taipei City, we all know. I think most of you know at this point. They're all fairly small apartments, and we can hear our neighbors. Especially if you're going to be playing instruments such as the drums or guitar, you can hear them fairly clearly through walls.
I mean, it's not just Taiwan, though. I assume the same thing would be true
Any
in New York
major
City.
Yeah, I think anything with an apartment building or houses that are close together.
Yeah, exactly.
But
with a modeler, it's like you can get what they say is like the recorded sound, because they also even replicate like the speaker cabinet of the amplifier, the microphone that's used to the position of the microphone on the speaker, like all of these small things you can adjust to make it sound more like it would on a recording.
That's awesome.
So that's really useful. I just use headphones at home and I can kind of get those tones, and it's not really perfect yet. And there's a lot of like tone purists who are purely against anything digital, but for me it's quite useful. I
have very little experience. I just play, I mess around with a ukulele that I bought on my honeymoon in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, of
yes, right. And it's, it's fun, and I love the I guess you can call it just naked music that comes out of this mahogany body, right?
Right.
I can understand though, there are music purists who don't want anything to alter that naked music, the naked sound of a guitar.
Right.
Well, it's that age-old thing of it's probably more technically precise. It sounds cleaner, but it's less human. There's less of a feel. I mean, some of this is ideological, and some of this is just the way people hear and observe things.
Well,
I'd probably be in the camp that's anti-technology, but I understand the purpose of it if you're making music and just testing things out.
Right, and to be like true to what they're doing, it's like they are still trying to replicate the sound of the analog equipment. They're not really yet in the realm of like coming up with their own ways of making the tone sound a certain way. So it's like they're replicating an old Marshall amp,
Sure.
So they're like taking the whole design of a Marshall amp and trying to make it sound like that, right? Whereas instead of like making a whole new sound. But if you're seeking that, obviously the best thing to do would get the real thing. So there is a kind of way in which the digital will always be a little bit behind the real thing, as long as they're trying to emulate the real thing. But I do think it's getting to a point where the technology is so good that the designers can actually make amps that could never be made in real life. Like they can put certain controls, certain components that wouldn't actually work electronically in the real equipment in the digital version.
Right.
And that can give you a tone you wouldn't get in real life.
Right. So Absolutely. I think I'm not gonna say anyone should really side on one side or the other, because a combination of all produces really interesting music.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, of course, and, it's a preference thing.
yeah,
And to be honest, like all of this like matters very little to most listeners. It's like there's kind of a joke that's like the audience doesn't know anything about what you're doing with this equipment. To them, it just sounds like guitar.
it's really true. It's like
Right.
the audience has no idea what's happening.
Yeah.
Right, and then, again, I could make the counter argument to what I made earlier. This it's just another version of studio trickery, which goes back long before modern computers. This goes back to the Beatles doing things in a studio that couldn't be done live, which is one
Right.
reason why the Beatles stopped performing live.
Right.
Countless musicians have done stuff in studios after that, and it's good music or it's not, and there's feeling and meaning behind it, or there's not.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The Beatles did a ton of innovative stuff in terms of recording that has even been replicated now in effects. Like they used, for example, like Paul, instead of playing in a bass amplifier, he would just go directly into the mixing board.
What?
Yeah.
So he'd plug his bass directly into a mixing board.
Yeah. And
Oh.
then sometimes he would just turn the gain on the board itself up so high that it would start to clip, which you know about being in radio. You know that sound.
Yes.
And that was like a sound afterwards that people thought sounded really cool. It sounded like rock and roll. And like now there are pedals that replicate that sound.
That specific sound. That's
Right.
neat.
So
So yeah, so people who innovatively mess around with the electronic or digital side of things, now people are replicating it with more.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even fuzz pedals, like some people say that they were trying to replicate like a broken speaker. So like people used to play amps so loud that the speaker would break and it would make this like kind of sound. But if you turn that up really loud, it sounds kind of cool. And so some people were like, man, and they say people used to intentionally break their speakers to like make it sound that way and things like that. So it's all this, yeah.
It's magic. It's the whole point of music is creativity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so because you guys are in a camp that I guess I'm nowhere near the understanding of both of you sitting in this room. Thank you for being here. So, okay, ready? So if you're going to recommend bands or musicians to experience like extensive use of effects,
Oh.
who would you possibly recommend?
Oh man, that is really tough. Well, I mean, okay, since we brought up shoegaze, which is because it's a music that is sort of like you can't actually play it without effects. It's by definition it requires all of these effects in order to be shoegaze.
Okay.
The most famous shoegaze band of all time, not only for their effects use but also studio trickery, is called My Bloody Valentine. And they have an album that came out, I think it was in the early 90s, called Loveless. So if
Okay.
you've never heard shoegaze before, by far this is like any shoegaze fan will be the first to recommend this record. Aside from that, like I guess if you want to hear like more modern metal tones, I would recommend Animals as Leaders, the band that we just talked about, because I think their tone is really great, but also their like actual guitar playing skill is like totally off the charts.
Yeah, Tosin Abasi's like
Yeah,
technique is incredible.
He's incredible, and he's even kind of invented his own playing style, which is known as thumping, which is kind of like where you hit the string with your thumb in such a way that it almost sounds like slap bass. Like the way when you hear slap bass, it's kind of like that, but for guitar. And also he's playing 8-string guitars, which like are almost like basses in themselves. So he's just like super innovative, both on the gear side and on the playing side. Their music is super cool. Their drummer is also like one of the best drummers around right now. So Animals as Leaders.
Yeah.
If you like instrumental metal music, they have no singing, but I think it's awesome.
Oh, that's like my get ready music, like when I'm psyching myself up to go do something for the day. Yeah.
I will warn
Instrumental.
you that it's like super progressive and
Oh.
like weird timing. So if you want something that's like nice to like sort of rock your head to, maybe not the best actually, because like the beat is constantly changing. So like
Okay.
right when you get into a rhythm, they like throw everything.
Oh, they throw you off.
This
Okay.
like sort of jazz style.
Okay.
But if you just want to see like what the top people are doing in guitar playing right now, like that's the band to look at.
Okay. All right. How about you, David? Any other suggestions?
Oh, no, this is Chris's show today. So I'm
oh.
gonna,
No, I'm happy.
Put in
Maybe
your
you've heard
input.
something that
What
I
do you
haven't
think?
heard. So
well, again, you understand the science and the
Methodology?
equipment much more than I do.
that
So
matter.
for me, I'm just going to tell you how
Sure, yeah.
what sounds good to me.
Uh-huh.
But in terms of guitarists, current or over the last 30 years, one band I've always revered is Dream Theater,
Oh,
which
yeah.
I assume you know who they are.
Yeah.
I don't know if what they're doing is, progressive on a mechanical level, but their music is definitely progressive, and it's 5 world-class musicians, and their guitarist, John Petrucci, is one of the best ever.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'd also second what Chris said about animals as leaders. There's another lesser-known group called, I think they're called Unlocking the Truth.
Oh.
Are you aware of
No,
them?
I've never heard of them.
Yeah, they might be adults now, but when they came out 4-ish years ago, I think they were in the range of 15 to 18 years old.
Okay.
So they're pretty cool. Again, I'd also...
Is that metal as well?
Yeah, that would be metal.
Okay.
I'd argue rock music as a whole is pretty mature.
Yeah.
So there's not that much new ground to break. There can still be great music to be made, but I think most of the innovation's been done by this point.
I will just add one extra band because I was thinking like these are mostly metal bands that we've recommended.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I could do a non-metal band too.
Oh no, just because I'm thinking like, but who also is famous for effects? And there's a band called Minus the Bear. They're from Seattle. They actually have broken up a few years ago.
Oh.
But their guitar player David Knudsen, I believe is how you say his name. First of all, he was in a really influential hardcore band called Botch, but they're not. Minus the Bear is not hardcore at all. It's almost like pop music. But he was really famous for using a particular pedal called the Line 6 DL4 because it has a very like a 14-second looper on it, and he would actually integrate these little you have to keep hitting the pedal each time you want the little loop to play, and he would integrate that into his playing in like a really seamless way that was really cool. So that's another sort of like effects-based band, and also I think their lyrics and stuff are really cool, and they're catchy. They're
Nice.
For an average listener, I think, could get into it. So
Yeah.
Minus the Bear, check them out.
That band I don't know.
Minus the Bear.
Yes.
I love the band names. Just in general, I love just reading.
Yeah, apparently it's a pun on the show called BJ and the Bear.
Uh,
I know.
Okay.
It's
I'm
very
not- I'm not
childish.
I'm not familiar with that show either.
It's childish, but it is kind of funny.
all right. Okay, so one more time for the cheap seats in the back. Your band.
Yomada Tamada.
Please go listen to them. They play at the Revolver in Taipei. But right, thank you guys for being here once again. It's David Pirozzi, my buddy from New York,
Yes.
and Chris Gorin from our international news team.
Yes, glad to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. And thanks, listeners, for tuning into Radio Taiwan International. I'm Michelle Chang, and we'll be back next Thursday with another episode of Geek Out.